Hey, what is up, you alls? Don't mind the mess in my car. Um, yeah, it's a mess. We just got back from out of town last night, and my car was packed because it's the only car in the household right now. Yeah. So, I don't want to make like a ton of trans videos. Because I don't want to be a trans YouTuber or a YouTuber who builds my platform off of being trans, because I do not feel that it is a big enough part of my person that I would want to talk about it so much. But I have reached a point in my transition and in my mind where I am more comfortable talking about it at all. And what I actually want to talk about today isn't about me or being trans. It's actually kind of the opposite of being trans. It's detransitioning. It's a really big topic right now, but I've seen a lot of kind of weird takes on it. And detransitioning is it's almost a taboo thing to talk about unless you are a part of the transmedical community or the radical feminist community. Transmedicalists and radical feminists are nothing alike. It is just one of those topics that is popular in both communities because it has an impact on both. Detransition affects both, women, and it affects the women who detransition. Yes, it's mostly women. There are men who detransition, but mostly women detransition. And it affects trans people. And I've seen some, I don't know, not so kosher kind of takes on it. So, first of all, I just want to give some, basic definitions just to make it a little easier to follow. Number one, gender dysphoria or sex dysphoria is a neurological disorder, or some people consider it a mental illness. It is in the DSM, which is where they put mental illnesses and neurological disorders, actually. I consider it a neurological disorder because there is a lot, and I mean 20 years worth of evidence to suggest that it is associated with certain parts of the brain, being, number one, misfiring, and number two, being shaped differently than the sex you are chromosomally or reproductive, in a reproductive sense. So gender dysphoria is the sense of disconnect or discomfort that one gets between in their mind and their body, and it is not a choice. It is not fun. It's not a fun thing to experience. And I do experience gender dysphoria, and I have for a long time. Especially my voice was my biggest thing for a very long time. I had a high-pitched voice, and when I spoke, it just didn't sound like me. I didn't recognize it. And my voice now, I love it. I love to hear myself talk. It's just great. But yeah. So, that's what gender dysphoria is. There is a lot of debate about this right now. You get, people trying to redefine it, or it is a disconnect between your brain and your sex, but people think of it. I've had people try to tell me that just because they didn't like, say, their uterus, that meant they had dysphoria and were therefore trans. Yes, you need dysphoria to be trans. That shouldn't even be a debate anymore. Regardless, just not liking a single or a couple sex characteristics of your body isn't dysphoria, and doesn't make you trans. What dysphoria is, it is the discomfort and disconnect, but it is also the want, the wish, or the feeling that you belong with the characteristics of another sex. So a person without dysphoria who doesn't like their chest doesn't necessarily want a male chest. But I have dysphoria, I don't like my chest, and I want a male chest. That is the difference. There has to be an intention or a wish or something there of the sex characteristics of another sex. You can't just not like part of your sex, right? So, just not liking your uterus is not dysphoria. You would have to not like your uterus and rather have a male set of organs, if that makes sense to you guys. That is gender dysphoria. Then there is also body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is a mental illness, typically caused it is caused often by pressure to appear a certain way, or trauma, or something along those lines. It is especially common in women, but yes, men have it a lot. They have it in slightly different ways than women, like they don't feel they have big enough muscles, or they don't have a big enough dick. Women might feel they don't have big enough breasts, or they have too big of breasts, but they're not feeling that feeling of wanting the other sex's characteristics there. You understand? So that is the difference between gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia. And there has been a rise in people transitioning in general, which is not a bad thing, no. But when you look at the numbers, the people who are, there is, the rate of people transitioning from female to male is skyrocketing, and it increased by 8 times in the last several years. And while the people transitioning from male to female has not increased nearly that much, and now I don't know if there are numbers, I don't know if they've ever done real studies on this. I know that detransition is rare, but I do feel that it is becoming more common, or at least more prominent. And detransition is to, first of all, you transition. And to detransition, you have to have medically transitioned in some way. Otherwise, you're re-identifying or desisting in your identity. I don't really believe in the whole identity thing as a choice, but that is what they call it. But if you are detransitioning, it means you have medically transitioned in some way, or I guess you could also socially detransition, but I don't really consider it the same thing. But I've noticed a large rise in the number of detransitioners in the last few years, and I believe this is because of just the sheer misinformation that is in the trans community right now. Excuse me, sorry. And people attribute transgenderism to all detransition. That's not true. There are people who are transtrenders, and a transtrender is a person who is not trans, does not experience dysphoria, but claims a trans identity in some way or another. And there could be better words for it, because some of them actually think that they're trans, but others think that they just saying they're trans actually makes them trans, but they know that they don't have dysphoria. And there's the difference, is the thinking you have dysphoria rather than knowing you don't have actual dysphoria and still claiming the trans identity. And part of why people on this side think they have dysphoria is because we are, as an entire community, misinforming them. We are telling them, oh, just not liking your breasts is dysphoria, just not liking gender roles is dysphoria. I mean, just look at the definition of transgender, and it's literally anyone who doesn't fit gender roles And that is why we have these groups of people thinking they have dysphoria when they don't. And that's a lot more dangerous than people knowing they don't have dysphoria when they and identifying as trans, in my opinion, because these people who think they have dysphoria are just a lot more likely to transition and then detransition. If you know you're comfortable in your body the way it is, you're probably not going to transition. And my opinion on this has changed a little over the years. I have become more, I guess, more liberal in a way, in that I just don't care about transgenders as much as I used to. I do believe they have a negative impact on the community, but I don't think transgenders, the ones who are knowing they don't have dysphoria, I don't really think they're the ones who are detransitioning. I've seen transmedicalists, and a transmedicalist is somebody who believes you have to have dysphoria to transition, or be trans at all. I've seen transmeds detransition recently, and not just a few. Like, Storm Ryan was talking about it. He's a YouTuber, and he was talking about he's getting all of these messages from people who adored him, and he is a transmedicalist. He's who are detransitioning, and that is the trans community's fault, as well as there's a little bit, there is societal stuff in it, in that convincing people believe that it might be easier to be a straight person than a gay person, or fetishism, there are a lot of things you can attribute to detransition, but in my opinion, the worst part is misinformation. When you are telling somebody that just not liking their breasts means they should get a male chest and go on testosterone, if somebody just wants a flat chest, not a particularly male body, they can do that. And they don't have to go on testosterone, and that is their choice, and that is their body. But it does not make them trans. And for somebody who just doesn't like their breasts to go on testosterone, they're going to get a deep voice, an Adam's apple, hair, and male body fat stuff. And they're going to get all of the effects, and they're going to realize that, wait a minute, I didn't want all this, I just didn't like my chest. And so we're not educating people correctly. And I don't have anything against detransitioners, but we also don't treat detransitioners right as a community. We scorn them, or criticize them, and call them transgenders and stuff, and really what they need is support. Because the way I felt before transitioning is the way they're going to feel afterward. And is the way they're feeling while they're detransitioning. And they're suddenly in this body they don't recognize, like I was pre-transition, but they're getting shit on because they thought they were trans when they're not. And it's really unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation. The existence of detransitioning is really sad, in my opinion, because transitioning for some people is so amazing, and it's so life-saving. For me, it was life-saving. It was freeing and empowering, and the ability to speak without my voice grating out on my ears, and the ability to sing male songs and not sound like a woman, and the passing as male in my day-to-day life, and my male characteristics that I have developed, like larger muscles and body hair, they make me so happy. And that is how it should be. They should make you feel normal in your skin. And the fact that it's not making people feel normal in their skin is an issue, because that's why it exists. And yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what else to say, but I think we need to, as a community, and as a society, re-examine how we look at things, and how we explain things, and just not fitting into gender roles does not make you trans. It doesn't make you transgender, it doesn't make you transsexual, whichever one you want to use. Just not liking your body doesn't make you trans. And the more we push the idea that it does, the more people are going to detransition. And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of us who believe that within the next few years, the rates of detransition are gonna keep spiking. And unfortunately, that means the rate of people becoming trans-exclusionary radical feminists is also going to keep spiking, because TERFs, that's the abbreviation for what I just said, prey on detransitioners. They prey on young, vulnerable women. They prey on detransitioners because they're now so uncomfortable in their body, and they want almost a scapegoat for why they did it. And TERFs will blame the trans community as a whole, and I don't know how to put it, but a lot of, not all, clearly not all, but a lot of detransitioned women do turn into TERFs or radical feminists who don't believe anybody's actually trans because they transitioned and regretted it. And so they don't believe anyone should transition because they regretted it, everyone else is too, and that's stupid too. So we need a mass reform of what it means to be trans. And I don't mean the whole transmedicalist ideas of, targeting people for presenting too femininely, or targeting people who identify as non-binary. Those things are not important. Those things will go away on their own when we reestablish what it actually means to be trans and to be born trans. And when we reestablish that gender roles and gender are not the same thing. Gender roles and who you are not the same thing. And that most people are not trans. Most people do not experience dysphoria, and that you should, if you can, see a professional who can help you figure out if you actually have dysphoria or not, before you transition. And it's just, it's a mess, because, and I'm not blaming detransitioners here, but the existence of detransitioners really is fodder for transphobic people. They use them as fodder. They exploit their vulnerability as somebody who is now uncomfortable in their body, and they use it against trans people. And so anyway, I guess to kind of restate, we have to reestablish the difference between gender roles and gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia and being trans and being gender nonconforming. And I think if we can do that, in the next few years, we will stop having so many people transitioning and then detransitioning. And I think that'll be really good. I mean, we don't need people detransitioning. It's a really unfortunate thing. And again, if you're watching this and you have detransitioned, nothing against you. And if you don't regret your transition, even though you're detransitioning, I respect how you feel, and I don't understand it, but I respect it. But as a whole, not as a whole, as a general thing, the reason people detransition is regret, because they are not finding themselves. We need to encourage exploration without permanent change. If you want to transition, first of all, present as the opposite sex for a while. And if you want to get top surgery, but you don't want a male body, bind for a while and live and talk to a doctor and a therapist and see if there's any treatments for body dysmorphia that don't include surgery. And if you do need surgery, that's okay. And if you do wind up getting surgery without testosterone or estrogen or whatever, that's absolutely alright. And we need to reestablish that these things are okay. But they are not the first step to take. They're not even the second step to take. They should come after a long process of introspection and talking to doctors and talking to other people who have had similar experiences and looking into why you might feel these things, whether it be trauma or sexism or dysmorphia or whatever, before we take such extreme steps Gender is not gender roles. Who you are is not determined by how you dress or whether you're masculine or feminine. A masculine woman doesn't have to be a man. A feminine man doesn't have to be a woman. Excuse me. And I think for a period of time there was a little bit more of a balance there. When my mom was growing up, she thought drag queens and trans women were the same thing. And then there was this period where they were starting to separate, and it was becoming, easier to differentiate between a GNC person and a trans person. And now it's kind of meshed back together because of misinformation. If you really have gender dysphoria, you have not only a discomfort or disconnect with the sexed parts of your body, and it doesn't have to be every single one. Some people don't have as much bottom dysphoria as they do top dysphoria, although that usually changes after top surgery. Once you get rid of something so massive up here, it really becomes obvious that something is wrong down there. But I forgot what I was saying. But yeah, dysphoria is very complicated. But it is how you are born. It is not about gender roles that are enforced on you. It has nothing to do with how you... It does, and that's wrong. It does have to do with how you're perceived, but it's not the only thing it has to do with. If your only discomfort is how you're perceived, it's not dysphoria. It has to do with your body and your internal sense of self and the way you feel in your body. And dysphoria is a horrible feeling, and you don't want to give it to yourself by transitioning without it, But not every person who detransitions, fetishized gay men if they identified as a gay trans man, or was did have internal sexism. Some people really did think they were trans and really did think they had dysphoria, and they get to the point where they're transitioning and they realize that it's not right and it's not working for them, and they go back, and that's okay. We need to learn to respect that. We need to learn to respect gender nonconformity. We need to learn to respect what gender dysphoria is and where it comes from. It is neurological. It isn't going to change. There isn't a medicine you can take that's going to change the shape of your brain. And I think, kind of the ideas, I haven't put them together very well, but the ideas I'm trying to state in this video will help not only educate, the general cis community, cis as in not transgender. It'll help people, it'll help the trans community, and it'll finally, not finally, I think I want it to start ending the big divide within the trans community over stuff like non-binaryism, non-binary, or, you know what I mean? Because if we stop looking at gender as a community, because it is the popular opinion, if we stop looking at gender as a social identity and look at it purely as how we feel in our own bodies, it will put the trans community, it'll help the trans community, it'll help the cis community understand us, it'll help, people who could potentially wind up detransitioning because they thought they were trans, because gender has been pushed on them as a social identity. I don't know if any of that made sense, but this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to end it here. If you have any questions or any comments, go ahead and ask them, and I will try to reply to them as best as I can. And if you are a detransitioner, I would love to hear about it, because people's experiences are all unique, and for a long time I was afraid that I would wind up regretting it and detransitioning, because I'd heard so many stories about people who were a lot like me, people who suffered trauma, people who, came out in their teens and who wound up regretting it and detransitioning, and I don't. I love what testosterone has done to me, and I cannot wait for top surgery. And so, even though my story is so similar to theirs in a lot of ways, it turned out completely differently. And some trans people have doubts, and some don't. And some detransitioners had doubts, and some didn't until they were, along in transitioning and they realized it was wrong. Anyway, I hope this video has, opened your mind or explained something you didn't understand or anything, because that's all I really want to do. And I also don't script these videos. That is why, because I don't read from scripts very well. I stutter when I am trying to read from scripts. Anyway, that is why I kind of ramble. Yeah. Anyway, hope you guys have a good day, and I love you.